Well, hey, friends from Christian Faith and the Natural Sciences. It turns out that I have a scratched cornea. I went to urgent care today, and that's what I found out. I don't know how it happened. I don't know exactly when it happened, except it had to have happened on Sunday. I just don't know the circumstances. Anyway, I'm sure I'll be back with you on Wednesday. But I want to talk a little bit about the opening of John Haught's book. I'll try to do it quickly. Yeah. Right away in his introduction, I think it's a very useful chart that he does there on page 2. The new cosmic story, rounded off here to 13.5 billion years. That's a lot of years. In a lot of ways, kind of unimaginable, but this little library helps a little bit. He's got 30 volumes, right? Each volume has 450 pages in it, and each page is 1 million years. Folks, we call that deep time, and it's almost unimaginable. You can see how he's got it laid out there for the first 20 volumes, 450 pages each page 1 million years. Lifeless and mindless matter. There's a real problem with that I'm going to point out right away. Earth's story begins, Haught writes, or in this diagram, in volume 21. Life begins in volume 22. A rather dramatic explosion in species variation near the end of volume 29, the Cambrian explosion. Dinosaurs go extinct on page 385 of the last volume. And we're in that volume too. And oh my goodness, modern humans on the last page 450. A lot of time represented there. And one of the things that strikes me as interesting that Haught says more than once with too much confidence is that, life begins, we can say life begins on Earth, but notice for the first 20 volumes, he says lifeless and mindless matter. Well, there is no way that one could make that claim that for the first 20 volumes of this picture of the universe, that it was lifeless. It might have been well into it. It might have been somewhere in, volume 14, 15, or 16, maybe later. But there's no way that we can insist that it was all lifeless until life appeared on planet Earth. I know we could say as far as we know, but we don't know very far. And we know hardly beyond, our own solar system, and that we probably don't know that well, but that's such a speck. My point being, it's once one accepts this concept of deep time, and if one believes, as I do, and I know many of you do, that there is a God, that God, and for me as a Christian, the God that Jesus prayed to and taught us about and revealed, there is no particular reason why we have to think that God's creative activity in terms of life is restricted to our little planet. We'll have a lot of opportunity to talk about this more, and you might find that immediately objectionable. I don't know, but I think it's worth pointing out. Now on page 3, he talks about this new cosmic story. It's still relatively new. About halfway down the first paragraph, on page 3, John Haught, Roman Catholic theologian, who has attended church with me one time. That's a backstory. But he did. He's gone to a Nazarene morning worship. One of the world-class Roman Catholic theologians in the world. Went and he heard me preach. Isn't that crazy? Some traditionally religious believers find the new scientific story of the universe strange and disturbing. Well, in many ways it is. So they reject cosmology, that is, this picture of the universe, and evolutionary biology for making the world look so different from the one they have read about in their holy books. Now, that description is going to end up being somewhat illustrative of what he'll call the conflict model. That is a conflict between religious faith, or we'll say Christian faith, and the natural sciences. Conflict. Now, the problem is, it's not a problem, but it's an observation. For most of the book, as I mentioned in class last week, Haught certainly will talk about the conflict model a lot, but his strong tendency is not to approach the conflict model from the religious side of the conflict, as he is here when he talks about traditionally religious believers who find this new scientific story objectionable. So it's not what they read in Genesis or whatever, and so they don't accept it. Most of the time, he's going to approach that conflict from the side of, we'll say, the natural sciences, and especially those who are not just scientists, but naturalistic or materialistic in their science, and beyond their science to their assumptions about ultimate reality. So he'll almost always be approaching this from, we'll say, just the atheistic side of the conflict. Okay, here he briefly kind of does it from the side of, we'll say, the Bible believer side of the conflict, if that made sense. Number two, other people of faith fully accept the new cosmic story as interesting and true, but they consider it theologically inconsequential. For them, science raises no really new questions. And that's the model of, what is that model called? I should remember, but I don't remember it right offhand. First one was I said conflict. Oh yeah, it is conflict. The second one is contrast. That's right, it's contrast. So that second one, contrasting these two stories and seeing them as, or the natural sciences and religious faith as being so different that they don't really connect with each other. And finally, there are theologically interested people. John Haught would number himself in this group. I would be with him as well. Hope that many of you will as well. Who find in the new cosmic story an opportunity to think new thoughts about God, human destiny, and what the universe is all about. So, of course, he's going to use these three, the third one being convergence. So you have conflict, contrast, and convergence. And he describes them briefly on page 4 a bit more. All right. And I assume that our reading for today is faith opposed to science. And you see right away 1, 2, and 3, conflict, contrast, and convergence. So, a word to the wise. As you read this book, you have to always remember that Haught's going to be presenting 3 different models in each chapter for each question. Spoiler alert, Haught is always on the convergence model as his model. That's the third one. So whatever he says there, you could probably, in fact, you could fairly assume in the convergence model descriptions, you're getting John Haught's perspective, his convictions. When he's describing the other two, just remember he's describing positions that are not his. In other words, you have to be a very careful reader. I know many of you are. I fear that some of you may not be, just because the percentages would suggest that. And all I mean is, as you read, you must always, always be aware of when an author is presenting possibly a perspective with which she or he does not agree. Okay? So be aware of that in this book. So I don't know that I need to say a whole lot about this chapter. Is faith opposed to science? The conflict model would say yes, and science is opposed to faith. The contrast model would say basically, well, faith and science are two different pursuits. They're really asking very different questions. They don't really impinge on one another. So you read on page 14, first full paragraph, by sharply segregating science from faith and theology, contrast seeks to avoid the confusion that leads to conflict. It respects both science and theology as independent modes of inquiry. Theology is not cut out to do science, and science cannot settle the question of God's existence or the nature of ultimate reality. So he goes on and explains that a little bit more. That again is the contrast model. The convergence model, the third one, basically is the one that we're trying to pursue in this class, which is, or at least I'm pursuing it. How do what the natural sciences teach us about the world, the universe, our life here on planet Earth, how do these ideas potentially impact or influence how we think theologically? That would be a convergence model where you're trying to, kind of pursue these hand in hand. He mentions one of the great examples of this convergence model at the bottom of 17. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was a French Catholic paleontologist. He died in 1955, the year that I was born. And Teilhard was a very adventurous thinker who definitely wanted to think about faith, Christ, God, Christianity through the lens and with the help of the notion of a very old universe, of old Earth, evolution. I'd say those are the main things. And by the way, in his own lifetime, and I think that Haught might mention this, he was a very controversial figure, and so much so that he was effectively silenced by the Vatican, that is the Roman Catholic ruling authorities of the Pope, I guess, ultimately. His writings now are more accepted, but still with not all Catholics by any means, and certainly not all Christians. But a very visionary thinker, I'd put it that way. And I think that Haught owes a lot of his ideas about the convergence of the natural sciences and Christian faith from the pioneering work of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, French Roman Catholic priest, who ended up being effectively exiled to Mongolia to dig up fossils a long ways away from Rome and from home, with the hope that his ideas would not have too much influence on the church at large. Well, that's probably enough for now. I'm going to stop. Just wanted to give you this little brief background and intro to the book that we're reading, and I'll see you Wednesday and do your assigned reading for then.